if it's essential for doctors, nurses, healthcare workers, truck drivers, grocery store workers, and many other brave Americans to keep carefully manning their own duty stations, then my view and the view of my colleagues is it's essential for senators to carefully man ours and support those folks who are out there on the front lines.
Welcome back. That was Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell today defending his decision to bring the Senate back in session next week, even as the halls on the other side, the Capitol, will remain empty after House leaders called off their return on the advice of a congressional doctor. Joining me now, Delaware Senator Chris Coons, Democrat from Delaware. Senator Coons, let me just start there. What do you make of Senator McConnell's rationale? He's basically saying, look, he knows that there's some risk here, but that you guys have a duty to be on the front lines.
Well, three things, if I could, Chuck. In addition, thanks for being on again with you. First, we are on the front lines and doing important work in our home states, where every senator I know is working very long days, handling constituent questions and complaints and concerns, supporting our governors and our state governments as they are finding their way through the maze of the different provisions in the CARES Act. I've been doing calls morning, noon, and night to try and help small businesses and nonprofits to sort through the Small Business Administration programs, interacting with the Department of Treasury and the IRS around stimulus checks, and trying to help our state and our hospitals get access to the assistance that was promised in the CARES Act, but that still has some strings attached or some limitations that make it difficult for them to exercise. So first, I think we are doing our essential work here in our home states. Second, Senator McConnell hasn't laid out what it is we'll be doing once we get back to Washington. The only vote that he has scheduled, the only agenda item for next week, is a confirmation vote on a non-controversial nominee and a hearing for a judicial nominee who is an acolyte of Senator McConnell's. So if we're going to put our own work, if we're going to put at risk the workers who we rely on day in and day out for the Capitol complex, the Capitol police officers, the food service workers, the maintenance folks who keep the Capitol going, we ought to have a plan for how they're going to be kept safe, which we don't. And we ought to have an agenda of oversight and engagement that is far more substantive. Last, one of the things I'm most concerned by is Senator McConnell's proposal that if we're going to get any more assistance for our home states and counties and cities that are starting to have to lay off public employees, we have to give a waiver of any liability for an employer who doesn't provide adequate protection to their workforce. I think I see a pattern here. It's important that we demand adequate protection for the workers in the Capitol and in our home states.
Right. Speaking of the issue of aid to states, I want to play for you something the president just said about immigration regulations and how it may tie to aid to states. Take a listen, sir.
Explicitly, will you seek to prevent the next round of aid from going to sanctuary states and cities?
Well, number one, we shouldn't have to pay anything anyway, because all they do is make it very hard for law enforcement. So that's number one. But I think in the bigger picture, I don't see helping cities and states if they're going to be sanctuary, because all sanctuary means to me is it's protecting a lot of criminals.
Senator Coons, is that legal? Can you condition aid on that or not? I can understand if you're against it, but I'm just curious if you think it's constitutional, if he can condition the aid that way.
You know, Chuck, I don't have an answer that I can give you off the top of my head that I am certain of from a legal perspective. I'll tell you that without specific authorization from Congress that says you can condition this aid on full compliance with some of the very specific provisions that relate to a state or a city being considered a so-called sanctuary state. I'm not sure that this is legal. And frankly, as you know, the president and Congress have gone back and forth over his attempts to, and ultimately his success at, diverting billions of dollars from vitally needed military construction projects to the building of his wall. So there's been some very recent legal opinions on this area. We have, in past appropriations bills, constrained the president's ability to redirect funds mid-year in ways that Congress didn't approve of and doesn't know of. But on this particular fight, I think, this is just off the top of my head, I think that he could only do that if we appropriated funds with no restriction on their being limited based on compliance with sanctuary cities.
Well, you are painting a picture of what's going to be a very, very, I think, partisan fight over the aid to states.